Redford es una leyenda del estrellato fílmico, uno de los actores más atractivos del cine norteamericano que hace suspirar a las mujeres en todo el mundo. Surgió del teatro en Broadway en los 60s y afirmó su fama con la película Descalzos en el Parque. No contento de solo actuar, Robert Redford ha dirigido 2 películas. Con la primera, Gente Común, ganó el Oscar por la mejor dirección. Y además de todo esto, Robert Redford es un ser humano muy respetado por su gran interés en los problemas ecológicos por los que trabaja desde los años 70. Mr. Redford.
Sí.
Buenos
días.
Buenos tardes.
Felicidades. Oh, buenas tardes.
It's tardes now. You arrived late.
Yo estoy tarde.
Mr. Redford, you are a movie actor. You have been directing movies. You are a producer of films as well. What does cinema mean to you?
It means a few things. It means translation. It can mean education. It's certainly supposed to mean entertainment. That's the essential reason, I think, for cinema. Although I see cinema in a broader sense. Translation, because it can translate a culture, and I think it can translate a culture almost better than political propaganda that comes from the country. You know, your country says to my country, this is what we're like, this is what we do, this is what we believe. Very often that's propaganda, and we respond with our propaganda. Thank you very much, this is what we believe, and this is what we're going to do, and very often very little of it might be true. But when film is made by filmmakers in a country in the middle of a social situation, I feel you can learn more about the culture through film. So for me, film is a translation. In my country, for me, it's a translation of my society, the society that I'm in, the powers that control my life, like politics, religion, sports. Education, there could be more, but it's an education. Someone doesn't know something, they see a film and they say, oh, I didn't know that, so that's a form of education. I think that film can do more in that area. Entertainment, because that's really what it is. That's why it was started. And it is probably the greatest and most powerful form of entertainment, at least in this country, I would suspect around the world.
Do actors realize the power they have to influence others?
No, I don't think they really do. I think it's very hard for an actor to know exactly what the power is. Some actors think they have more power than they do. Some actors act like they have more power than they do. Some people aren't aware nearly of the power they have. So it's very distorted. Because it's a distortive industry. It distorts everything. It's very hard to be clear and straight in my industry.
You began acting in plays in Broadway, and then you came to movies. Do you miss sometimes the acting on stage?
Yeah. What I miss is the live feeling. I miss the connection, the live electric connection with an audience. Film is very cold because it's very difficult to relate to anything with cameras and lights and microphones and everything. But on a stage, there's just this small space between you and a group of people that are waiting to be judged, waiting to judge, waiting to be entertained, waiting to find out what you're going to do, and there's something exciting about that. I miss that. I miss the live quality of the theater. I also miss the ability to sustain a work uninterrupted, essentially uninterrupted, for 2 hours. I like that feeling. In a film, it's cut, once again, another take, another take, another take, cut, stop, lunch. On the stage, with the exception of the intermission, once the curtain goes up, it starts. And it's a train going down a track, and that feels good. It feels good because you can get involved in a character and sustain it for 2 hours, and the emotional track that you're on will continue, and that's very satisfying to a performer. Beyond that, that's about all I miss in in the theater. I think there's a lot that I don't care for.
When was the last time you were on stage?
1963.
Oh, a long time ago.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first film you saw when you were a child, or it's
First
too much
film I
to
saw?
ask? Yes.
No, I don't remember the first film I saw. I remember the first film I remember.
Yes, well, that's the one.
It was a film about, it was called The Fallen Sparrow, and it was with John Garfield and Walter Slezak. I found that out later. At the time, I was too young. I just knew there were people there.
Okay.
But it was about the war, Second World War, as most films were at that time. This would have been 1941 or 2. And Walter Slezak played a Nazi villain, and John Garfield played an agent, an American agent. And I remember it was very frightening because Walter Slezak was in a wheelchair through most of the film, and there was this mysterious figure that followed and haunted John Garfield, who had a limp. And of course, we found out at the end of the film, the man in the wheelchair was actually walking with a limp. And that stuck in my mind. And my uncle, who had a great perverse sense of humor, was with us. My father, my mother, my uncle, and I, and my brother were at this film. And when we came home, he got outside my door and limped outside my door.
Scared you.
So it had a big impact on me, that film.
You have said that one of your films that you prefer the most is Jeremiah Johnson. Would you tell us why?
Oh, that I made?
Yes, that you have. Yes, that you have worked in.
Yeah. It's hard because there are a lot of films that I really enjoyed, but for different reasons. I enjoyed All the President's Men because that was a very substantial film that had to do with investigative journalism, which had not been put on the screen before. I was fortunate to have a great historical event to mount it on. And it was also a challenge because a lot of people felt that it wouldn't be possible. It'd be too difficult to shoot in Washington, considering the subject matter. That it would be threatening to the Republican administration in office at that time, that they would probably make it very difficult for us to film there. That I would not be able to capture the essence of investigative journalism, and that the audiences would be so bored with Watergate that they wouldn't want to see it or hear about it. So it was a big challenge, and that meant a lot to me. I spent 3 years on that project. The film called The Candidate really expressed my views about my own, my views about my political system, the political system that really runs the process in our country, which is, in my opinion, I'm quite critical of it, because I think it's more about image and appearance and illusion than it is substance or real context. So I wanted to make a film that expressed those views, that I was disappointed that we were heading on a track that showed the manipulation behind the scenes just to either win an election or present a character as a favorable or popular person, as though that was the only criteria. That angers me so much, considering what opportunities we have in this country, how good democracy can work in this country. It always disappoints me or even makes me angry when it fails or falls short. So making that film, I liked making it because it got rid of something inside me. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid was just the most fun I've ever had on a film. It was just plain fun.
How fun was it when you had to jump from
Well, I
the
only
top?
jumped below the cliff,
Oh.
and Paul Newman and I jumped about 12 feet, landed on the scaffold. Then they took 2 stuntmen, and they had them drop off of a big crane about 70 feet into the water.
And of course you
And
knew
they
how
took
to
me
swim.
I knew how to swim. Yeah, so I had to act like I didn't. On Jeremiah Johnson, yeah, that's the most personal.
Why?
Because I live in the mountains, because I live outdoors, I live in a semi-wilderness area. The mountains, for me, symbolize a lot. It's where I choose to live most of my life. The history of the mountain man is very interesting, and I think it's something that most people in my country, anyway, don't know about. It's a part of our history that is really, we hear a lot about cowboys, we hear a lot about pioneers, we hear about the Mormon pioneers, we hear about cowboys, we hear about people with the trains, prospectors, gold diggers, but those are not the real pioneers. What you find is that the real pioneers are the men who went into the mountains in the early 1800s alone and trapped for beaver, bear, and other such animals, and had to live by their wits alone with just a mule or a horse. And these men are the men who really charted the original routes through the mountains from the Midwest to the West, and then it was followed by settlers and cowboys and then the trains. So those were the initial people that established routes of trade and hunting. And that fascinated me. Their behavior fascinated me. How difficult it was to live fascinated me. I mean, imagine going into the wilderness with no way to make a fire, no matches, no sleeping bag, no down comforters.
And surviving.
And surviving, more than surviving, it's surviving and making a trade, making an industry for yourself, from hunting and trapping and skinning and so forth, and then trading those skins for either cash or other material. That interested me. So I began to research the mountain man a lot and came up with the idea for this film. So it was very personal. And then filming it where I lived, personal.
How have you managed to escape from the outside influences and rules?
Well, it's funny you mention that, because the theme, the intellectual theme of Jeremiah Johnson was about a man who simply wanted to be on his own, who wanted to be away from the codes of society, particularly the military. The establishing shot in the film is a man with the remnants of a military uniform who's choosing to leave that behind him and go into the mountains. And all he says is, I want to be a mountain man. The fallacy of that notion that you can get clear of codes of existence, is what the point was, in the intellectual point of the film. It said there are codes that govern every aspect of life, including nature. And in this case, he crossed a code that belonged to the Native American, the Indians. He said, you don't cross a burial ground. And he went through a burial ground leading a group of men to survival. And the code that governed that burial ground had them seek revenge on him and his family, and they murdered his family, which made him crazy. And that started him in revenge also. So he felt he had to take the lives of the Indians that killed his family. Once he did that, they felt they had to take his life. So it just compounded itself in an almost biblical sense. And it all stemmed from the fact that he believed he could get to a place where there were no codes. And what he found was that there are codes even in nature. Now, about my life, there is something very appealing to me about living away from codes, living away from the stereotypes of society. You know, you're an actor, therefore you must be this, or you must live this way, you must have this kind of a lifestyle. You're a white American male, therefore you must be this. There are all the stereotypes. I don't like that. And I've lived with that much of my life. Even the idea of being considered a movie star, that's a stereotype I don't much like. So I've tried to engineer my life around that, through it, above it, below it, and I do keep running into it.
To make yourself just a man in the world?
Well, to have a life that I can control somewhat, have a life that I can continue to grow and learn and be excited by things. I mean, this is an industry that can close in around you without you even knowing it. And one of the threats is that as an actor, if you're well known, there are always 3 stages, I felt, to look out for. And I remember putting them up on a wall when I thought of it. The first step is that you are treated like an object when you become known. And the second step is that you begin to behave like an object. And the third step is that you become an object. And that to me was the most frightening thing of all, because in a sense you lose your soul or you lose your identity. And so there was this, I guess there's always been a struggle for me to keep that from happening when the forces are very strong to make it happen. So there's been this struggle. So you live away from Hollywood. Doesn't mean you hate Hollywood. I don't hate Hollywood. I just don't want to be in that life. I would rather have another life, and I would rather have that be my work. But it's not easy.
Tell me something. You moved from acting to directing at one point. What made you do that?
Wanting to get control of what I felt, the way I saw things, that I had worked for almost 20 years as an actor, and in every situation, even when it was pleasant, you are someone else's labor that you can't control the piece that you're in. You're just a small part of it. And I just wanted the opportunity to design the whole idea. And so I wanted to direct because I saw a particular project that I saw a certain way, and I thought, I'd rather do this myself because I'm not sure that if I gave it to somebody else and I just produced it, that it would be what I saw in my mind. That was one reason. The second reason was I was getting tired of acting. And the third reason was that I could bring something I thought I'd lost forward. It was still alive, but in a new form. I could combine it with performing to direct. So I was able to design scenes, and that felt great.
Were you surprised when you won the Oscar for the
I was.
directing?
Yeah, I was.
You have made 2 films about Latin America, the Milagro Beanfield War and Havana. Where does your interest for Latin America come from?
First of all, I was born and raised in a Hispanic atmosphere, in a Mexican community in Los Angeles. I was born into a Mexican community. My father, we didn't have much money. My father delivered milk, and we were forced to live in a community that was essentially Mexican. And in those days, in Los Angeles, much of Santa Monica and this area here was Hispanic. So that was my early exposure. Our next door neighbors were Sanchez, and I had tremendous rapport with these people. Then my grandfather, who lived in Texas, had saved a man in 1923. There was a man named Hidal Casares, and he and his young wife, who was pregnant, were trying to escape. They were trying to get across the border to seek employment. And the authorities were turning them back. And my grandfather just happened to be there at that time, and he spared that man, and he said, I will give him work. So they turned him over to my grandfather, and he became close to my grandfather, kind of like Friday in Robinson Crusoe. You know, my grandfather gave him work and paid for his children to go to school, and he had 6 children. Now, and he worked for my grandfather in Texas. When I was a child growing up, I would spend my summers in Texas. And Heel and I became very close. And he told me stories. I was told stories by my father, and it's a family trait that we're big storytellers. We're Irish and Scots. So we're in the tradition of great storytelling. But Heel was another kind of storyteller, and it just opened up a world to me. The way he would tell stories and the things he told stories about were so impressive to me. So we became very close. Then I lived in Spain twice in my life when I was a painter, and I got very close to the people there. So I had this affinity for the Latin culture. And when I did the Milagro Beanfield War, I wanted to demonstrate that there was a subculture in our country that few people knew much about, that were actually there before we had a country. That it was 400 years old, and it was fascinating, and believed in an entirely different way, because they believed in angels. And I was very influenced by Isaac Singer and Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And I felt that the way they depicted their cultures was the way I wanted to see these people portrayed. So I just decided to make that film.
Could you explain us about the Sundance Institute and also about the creation of the Latin American Initiative for Movies?
Because of my feelings about the Latin culture and being so close, being so much a part of our hemisphere, I thought that starting an initiative at Sundance was a good idea to start developing an exchange between Latin filmmakers and our filmmakers, and that we could give each other something. A lot of people have asked me why you do this. Why have a Latin program? Film in Latin America is very poor right now. There's not much movement. The only movement that's really going on is Mexico. Brazil has died. The rest of the country is oppressed. Why would you spend this time on it? And Cuba, although Cuba will now change, but my response was that there is something we can learn from Latin America and something Latin America can learn from us, and I feel the exchange is good. Also, I'm prejudiced. I feel, as I said before, I'll maybe learn more about the culture through the films, the translation of that culture through artists, than political propaganda, speeches made by politicians, and so forth. So that excites me because I think we need to understand Latin America better.
Do you see lots of Mexican films?
Not lots, some. Some are so gory I can't look at it. But I think what we can learn is the resourcefulness. Latin Americans are extremely resourceful. They're more so than we are, I think. And that we can learn from when they have very little money to make a film, the art of their work that gets beyond not having any money is very valuable. And for us to learn, for our filmmakers who are rather spoiled, they get a lot of money, they get a lot of high technology equipment, all things that don't exist down there, that we see what they can do with it. In the exchange, we provide for them what our strength is, which is how to tell a story on film. Sometimes that seems the weakest in Latin film. As beautiful as it is, sometimes the story is weak or not strong. So I feel that by, for example, having Marquez come here and having a Latin American workshop for Latin American who live in the United States, how to tell the story is a good exchange. So that's what the initiative is all about. It's doing very well.
I was going to ask you about the Sundance Institute. How did it come to you, the idea of...
Because I felt that my industry was getting very narrow in 1979. I felt that it was getting centralized and too expensive. At the same time, all these new channels of distribution were opening up. Cable, home video. Suddenly there was this rapidly expanding distribution source, and there was not going to be enough product to satisfy it. And that if that happened, there would be a reduction of quality. Because what would happen is that as the channels grew, they would have to have product, and there wouldn't be any enough new product, so they would start using reruns and old things, which means the industry would not move very much. And that the standard of excellence, or the standard would go down. So I thought that was a contribution I could make to the industry. And beyond that, I have always believed that it's almost a responsibility of an artist to put something back. When he's received something, he or she has received something, that you should put it back into the ground, so to speak. So that's what I was doing. I was taking this land that was very important to me and contributing part of the land for an institute that would develop new talent.
Now that the Cold War is over and that the nuclear threat has receded, is ecologically suicide the biggest threat the world is facing?
Oh yes, I've felt that for a long time. I think the nuclear threat will just shift. I don't believe it's going to go away. I think it'll shift to third world countries. It will probably be reduced to a manageable level between the Soviet Union and the United States, but it's not going to go away because of the power it represents. And if it gets into the hands of, it's likely to go somewhere else. So I don't see the threat going away, but I do see the ecological problem as the greatest one. I mean, all you have to do is look at Chernobyl. You can look at the Middle East in Iraq as to what devastation can occur within a matter of days. And because we have gone so far without knowledge and experimentation, we've spoiled so much of our planet, it's very hard to get it back again. And of course, in this country, the main idea that moves people is invest, divide, build, acquire wealth, the acquisition of wealth, acquisition, control, development. That's just part of our way. And the earth is not going to do very well with that kind of an attitude unless there's a corresponding attitude of balance and preservation. And right now, particularly with our administration, which has a very poor environmental record and attitude, which is an extension of the last administration, so we've had 12 years of very bad management of our resources. That plus our attitude about the resources in terms of industry and development and real estate especially. The new threat, I think, to our ecology is real estate. So I would be encouraging of students to take action to protect their futures and make them aware that they have a power. And for myself personally, I will just continue to do what I've always done, is to speak to the issue in specific ways and to support candidates for our Congress who are environmentally sensitive.
Tell us about your new movie.
The next film I'm preparing is a film about Native American, two detectives who are Indians on the reservation, solving a mystery. I'm also preparing a political romantic comedy about a man who is a bachelor president, falls in love with a woman who is trying to leave Washington because she hates the system. And I'm also developing a Western about a particular character that lived in the West in the 1800s.
Is there anything you haven't done yet and that you'd like to do?
I'd like to learn fluent Spanish. I'd like to play the flute. I'd like to parachute from an airplane. I would like to that's all I can say at the moment.
Mr. Redford, do you know all the women who knew I was going to interview you sighed and told me they envy me? All of them said, oh, he's so sexy. How does that make you feel?
I don't want to stop them. Far be it from me to change their minds.
Well,
it's nice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Redford.
Thank you.
En Santa Mónica, California, Silvia Lemus.